Been moved by Angela S. Seconded by Sarah. Any further discussion on that? The team effort to to craft that. Okay, if there's nothing further, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. So that completes the director's report. And we will move to item 7.3, funding the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program. So welcome, Phil. And you can just highlight those matters you want to bring to the members' attention, and then there may be questions of you.
Kia ora, everyone. To be brutally honest, the conversation you've just had, I thought would be held under my papers on. Well,
oh no.
well, I think you will be many times, won't you soon? But I think just briefly, the committee's been asking us for the last few months to keep updating on how the programme, our MSP transport programme, can be funded going forward with current challenges. And obviously, what I did when we pulled this paper together was, we'd used inputs from NZTA in the past in how they'd come up with some of their funding decisions. We updated very recent, well, not yesterday's Hamilton Council decisions, but we put some dates in around our coming progress. And I got your representatives to help me write the paper in terms of current plans. So I saw this as an opportunity for maybe members to update each other on potentially where the current funding situations are, noting that we're simply not, and for the reasons we've just discussed, we're not ready to have that, how we're funding a programme. So, but it is very complicated. I find it complicated back at my home ranch around, separating the thinking money with the projects, but would note that obviously we're subject to funding decisions, but obviously, flying the flag for the programme and the ongoing thinking. But again, I feel that the conversation's probably already been had, unless there are other elements to discuss. You may, I guess, want to, given that I think the next meeting's not until next year now, obviously decisions will be made by then. So I guess the influence that this committee can have into those upcoming funding conversations is what we can focus on today, and we kind of already have to one degree, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. I'll open it up for questions, comments. Eugene.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the paper. It's very clear. I am aware to notice that Hamilton City's decision yesterday around retaining local share. Waikato District Council's view has always been different to that. Is that we and probably more so these days with affordability in our communities, having that local share is a we've always had a philosophy of spending $1 if we get subsidy in this roading area. So we're trying to get best bang for buck for our ratepayers. So, and that's always been a philosophy. We will be retaining some form of local share to do a bit of planning and design. So when funding does come available, we're ready to go. And also we will be working through, as you just mentioned, we're not quite there yet, but there will be possibly some local share retained for maybe looking into supporting a bit of this so it can continue on, and also the Route 44, which we just discussed in our last meeting about connecting into Pukekohe and lining up with Te Huia, etc. That's something that we don't want to see dropped, so that's something that we probably will have to retain local share for, but we will be pretty much giving ratepayers that benefit that they want really at this moment in time. So our portion of local share will be retained, will be quite minimal, but it definitely aligns with this paper and we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Don't. Angela, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Phil, for the report. I was just thinking in the future, um, when we do have our regional rating in place and for services, and what those next steps along the PT business improvement review are, PT infrastructure. Just wondering, has there been much thinking beyond that improvement review around how we fund the MSP in those middle and latter years? Don't have to give me an answer now, but even
Certainly be giving thought to what we do in terms of staging of projects. I don't, I'm not around the other stuff, I'm afraid. Yeah. What?
yeah, just wondering if yeah, maybe that's something we keep on our radar, but we can take that offline for now.
I may have misunderstood you. Sorry, this is just the funding over the funding for running the program over the next 3 years, or
Yeah, just delivery.
Rob.
Yeah.
There is very small or very reduced amounts at Hamilton City to maintain sort of my role running the group.
I think the question is, are you thinking about the commitment to deliver the things arising from, say, the bus rapid transit corridors work and those types of capital dollar investments, or are you thinking of the projects and the business cases and the thinking about the next phase of work in that?
I suppose just big picture thinking around, you know, what the future of funding could look like. So it's probably a bigger discussion than for today. But,
Okay, sorry, yeah. So the program, if we go back a couple of years, the program didn't give up. We've got that big scary 30 to 50 year figure for the program itself, and again, most of that is regional council, thank God. So yeah, that OPEX and capital. But, and if push comes to shove, yes, I could say, you know, it's, I guess part of the conversation I'll be having with councillors at my end will be, we would focus on looking at links to the east, or focus on links looking to the south, or would be we pushed, you know, south because of the fast tracking and emerging areas and Ron's conversations, and that's okay. And I think a point I made in our briefing session at our council this week was we've got a programme that is flexible to land use change. So if we are pulled in certain directions, we can adapt, and we do have an idea of what that would mean in terms of costs and design. And to be honest, it's in terms of what we're spending on infrastructure, it's an absolute pittance. So yeah, so the numbers are there, and they'll be part of the ongoing debate, I imagine, in terms of, you know, the next stage of design, or a corridor study, or a survey or something.
Just to add to that, from our perspective, the 10-year plan that council considered a few months ago, in the later years of that plan, included the dollars to start upscaling the contracts to deliver services quite significantly, and included a commitment to continue with the rail, subject to the agency providing its share, and there being community consultation about the willingness to pay. So the immediate conversation is around the story in the 2024 to 2027 period around the government subsidy elements of the programme. But our long-term plan out to 10 years includes the local share commitment or contribution towards those, which will then be advocating for central government to match as part of those later 3-year cycles.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? If there are not, there are 2 recommendations before you. And the second recommendation has been brought forward in terms of the attachment that Phil had prepared, and in terms of the Transport Working Group and the Future Proof Implementation Advisor coming back to us in February regarding the status of funding in terms of the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program. Okay, being moved by Eugene. If I can have a seconder all those. Thanks, Chair Pamela. There's no further discussion. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thanks very much, Phil.
Thanks.
And we'll now move to item 7.3, PT Pathways. Welcome, Bridget.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Bridget Doran and I'm here as a contractor working covering Catherine Simpson's maternity leave for now. And so I've been working on this report, which is the final version's been delivered within the last few weeks. So the report is there, and the highlight story is that this report takes a medium-term view of public transport to support the future-proof vision for the region. It looks at interventions from around 2026-27 through to 2038 to support those objectives, and therefore it builds on the network reviews and what we've got right now, and then also is informed by longer term stuff like bus rapid transit in Hamilton, for example. So the highlights from the outcomes of that work, which are in the report, are that the consultant Stantec looked at different objectives and route options within those for the metro area, metro spatial plan area. We workshopped the methods for deciding on those objectives and how they'd be decided, and the route options themselves. There were 2 different network options presented to the Transport Working Group. We developed criteria to assess them, and the one that came out more favourable was what is called the link option, which doesn't contradict the frequent routes just discussed earlier in terms of Hamilton network reviews. It kind of aligns with and builds on those. And so the working group endorsed the recommendation that that option is the preferred pathway. And that's what they're taking forward. The report discussed infrastructure investment implications for those services, particularly because of the implications of having frequent services in an otherwise unchanged network. There's you can't have frequent reliable services if you've got ongoing traffic congestion. So there's implications for infrastructure to make sure that the buses can get through and that they're providing good service and therefore attract passengers and achieve the goals of the overall program. So that's what we concluded, that the work delivered on its purpose. The Transport Working Group will use that in their ongoing efforts to build towards this vision.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up, and as the members will recall, we had a couple of workshops on this earlier on in the year. So, any questions or comments in terms of what Bridget has presented? Sarah.
Thank you, Bridget. I was just going to say we had an elected member briefing on this days ago, where elected members kind of got to have the first look at this new network and discuss, I guess, a potential way forward. And I think there was a real interest in, iterative approach of making changes that, or looking at where are the affordable changes that we can make where you're reallocating road space and things. We're ensuring that we're bringing the community along with us and integrating changes and things, those wider impacts and things. So yeah, there was good discussion on it. It's early stages, but I just wanted to let the committee know it.
No, thank you. And I've got Andy Baker online, then Mayor Adrian. Welcome, Andy.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, just as a matter of interest, I suppose, from we've been doing a bit of work up here with Auckland Transport called Room to Move, which is basically looking at how we move buses around, particularly the CBD in Auckland, which is becoming more and more challenging. And so AT have done a thing called Room to Move, which looks at everything from parking through to dynamic lanes through to changing the routes. And so it's actually a really, if you haven't had a look, be a really worthwhile adventure. Checking it out, it's go so far as to parking and all of that sort of stuff. So treating it as a network. And so just sort of I'd raise it for people that it might be of interest.
Okay. No, thanks, Andy.
To go visit AT and do to hear about what the work that they're doing, is it? Oh, he's gone now.
No, I'm still here. So sorry, what was that?
So were you inviting us up to Auckland to see the work that you guys are doing up there?
Oh, look, I'm no longer on the board of Auckland Transport, so but that's all right. I'm now chairing the Transport and something else committee. Look, if people want to come and catch up with AT and see what they're doing, they would. I could organise that with the drop of a hat.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that, Andy. Phil.
No, I was just going to add, we copy a lot of Auckland Transport. So no, we're in a good way. We use Auckland Transport often as a sounding board, particularly for some of their managed lane, some of the things that we know that we're going to be tackling and embracing. Yeah, we do reach out quite a lot to AT behind the scenes.
Okay. No, thank you. Here, Adrian.
Quite like this report and how it's captured, it's definitely, and this is where the critical part is the metro into the city, your city network and then your metro network. I guess the challenge I still have is with our regional connections and the suboptimal, they are suboptimal still, and just with obviously meeting the workshop with the councillors this week just highlighted the Matamata service in particular, is that it takes an hour and a half to get to Hamilton, catch the bus from Matamata going via Morrinsville. I understand why that's been put in place because some capacity bus pick up some people from Morrinsville. But ideally going forward, I would pose the question of how Matamata could be a metro as well in the long term if you come via Cambridge. Because the bus at the moment starts Matamata. If it started at Wahara, went to Matamata through to Cambridge, there's a link there that the bus may not need to drive right through to him. Just trying to add that in. It's not really, it's out of scope of this. I get that, but long-term thinking, the optimal route would be Cambridge because it will be quicker. I look forward to the trial results. Bus changes at the moment. It's probably outside of your scope a little bit, but half an hour is quite a difference of whether you're going to catch a bus or you jump in a car, especially when we live this close. Just want to flag that now that my councillors, especially my Matamata, always talk about empty buses, and we strategically optimising those routes so that people will use.
Yeah, I think what was useful from this work was it's the collaborative approach with the Transport Working Group and having that ongoing representation. And I think for the future, whether or not this network is implemented exactly as is, depends on the stories that we share amongst one another and how well those relationships continue. So yeah, I think that's a great input and completely, can align with the story as well.
It is a long-term view, and we'll learn to use public transport again. It was common years ago. We're not using it now.
Thank you. Angela Rees. Oh, and then Chair Pamela.
Yeah, thank you. Just had a question around on page 4 of the presentation, I suppose. Just around the number of frequent routes. We've got 3 at the moment. There'll be 9 by 2030 and 15 by 2039. Just wondering how those numbers were arrived at. Is that population driven or, given our track record so far, how realistic is that as well? Yeah, that would be my first question.
So there's a table in the larger report which we can send, which describes how they were worked out. So they were based on a combination of criteria that including mapping and catchments and population. So the combination of people connection from people to jobs, from student aged people to education, and balancing that with the overall population within 400 metres of a bus route of any kind. And there was also an equity criterion around the connection to our most deprived communities as a special, as a criterion. So when all that was modelled and mapped, that's where the balance of frequent and coverage routes was decided, and also their relative priorities. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
The early phases of the project, we had all the Hamilton City Council land use planners in the room to make sure that we were aligning the current growth and future growth areas with this. So good old fashioned PT planning, you know, getting the buses to where people are going to live and work.
Yeah.
Okay, and just so what's the sort of staging then for getting that many fast and frequent?
There's a sequencing and staging chapter in the report that talks about dependencies, and unfortunately it's a whole lot of ifs. It depends on how those assumptions about growth play out, how the staging in terms of infrastructure subsidies and decisions continues. It's not detailed and set in stone in terms of a program from year to year. It's really works back from the end goal of what a useful network might look like, and therefore what would be useful ways to do that provide, for example, infrastructure priority that helps in the short term while contributing to the longer vision. So it's that kind of building up piece by piece to get there. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of medium term independent.
Can I add to that? Sorry,
Yeah.
That's perfect. I think if we go back to the original purpose of that study, it was to focus, almost give us a baseline for informing future LTP conversations from 2027 onwards. So I've never seen a piece of work in the Waikato done like this that gives that 4 LTP cycle perspective, based on a collaborative exercise between local authorities to align the infrastructure with the PT planning, especially when it's consistent with all our BRT work. It's consistent with the ongoing BAU that a regional council does. It's actually that transition space for the BRT. So all the route planning that was done here is done to support that future network. So it's a lovely piece of work that's utilising all the other strategic work we've done over the last couple of years. Absolutely, it's funding dependent and decision dependent, but as a baseline, it's done exactly what we wanted it to do. So come 2027, you will have a piece of, well, we could use it sooner if you wanted to, but it's a piece of work there to say, here, we've got some costs, we've got some sequencing, we know it's aligned to our program because it's fallen out of it. I think that's really helpful for people like yourselves to make decisions, in the next year or two.
Yeah, thanks to all the people who have been working on this. I mean, it's nice to see all the layers of the plans actually aligning. Yeah, it's fantastic. I just had one more question on page 6 about intersection priority. Is that in place at the moment?
Do we have bus priority in place at the moment?
Yeah, just mainly the intersection, so transponder within buses to keep the light green.
Bus to signal technology.
Buses priority.
Like at Anzac. Victoria, for example. Yeah, not much.
So yeah, this study was, if you dig into the detail, particularly on places like Anglesey Street and getting into Clyde and using the Anzac Bridge and Fitiora Bridge, you're looking at a significant level of signal control to help future contraflow operation, and that report does highlight where we need either a bus lane or a bit of preemption at signals. So it's gone down to that level of detail. That's why I say it's useful for future decision making, because we know how much these things cost. So we can say, oh, in 2028, if we get this frequent route, whatever you want to call it, we're going to need to do this level of infrastructure as well. So again, I just think that's useful.
Just before I go to Sarah, Chair Pamela, did you?
A really interesting piece of work, and thank you very much for all the effort that's obviously gone into this. I suppose mine was a little bit more fundamental, and it builds on what you said about the assumptions around growth projections, because I was just looking at that on page 1. You know, the population is expected to increase by 1/3 in the next 30 years. Have we ever done an analysis over time of the projections we've said in the past and what they've turned out to be? I'm just reflecting on the latest announcement that for the 2nd year in a row, Hamilton is the fastest growing. The conversation we had at your council the other day about the need to plan, because the population is coming, whether or not we plan for it. And I would rather us be a generation that plans for it and plans well. And so I guess I just am wondering, have we ever checked the trajectory of planned population growth versus actual, just to ensure that we're not just planning for, sort of the base.
Yeah.
That we are testing our appetite for being potentially a bit bolder, given our previous experience of growing beyond our expectations.
I mean, I think that's a great question, because I asked it of the consultants myself. How do we know that these projections are useful? And so we did sensitivity tests on those assumptions, and also on the transport model assumptions and the walkable catchments and things like that. It's all within bounds of confidence in terms of what we expect could happen based on current number. And a lot of the stats in here are from 2018, because that was the most recent census data. So we talked about that in the Transport Working Group. And so what I think we've landed on is a network and an approach that is flexible and good, regardless of the specifics of how that trajectory pans out.
Gives me confidence.
Sarah,
Thank you, Chair.
and then Mayor Adrian.
Just in noting the questions from Councillor Angela, I was just wondering if maybe it's worth, say, at the next time we meet, having some information around bus priority and further clarity around infrastructure, I guess, on infrastructure matters like that. What opportunities are there for bus priority? I don't know what it costs, to do that.
So like a bus priority 101 kind of session on how it works and what it costs.
What would you find helpful, Angela? I'm just doing it.
Don't care.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, I'd love to do that. But so if there was a need to explain more about the rollout of infrastructure as part of this project, then we can easily do that. The information's there. If there's going back to basics of what we mean by signal preemption or bus lanes or managed lanes and things like that, we can do that as well.
I guess, because Angela was asking around using those transponders and utilising, I guess, our existing intersections, but having bus priority. I don't know if it's the recommendation from this committee back to Hamilton City Council to say, can you consider this when you're looking at, for example, can you consider this when you're looking at the prioritisation of your local share, or is it just you coming back to this committee with further information on what is possible around what's involved around, the signal prioritisation? Angela, you.
I think it's worth looking into. I mean, we're kind of leading in that space in terms of emergency service vehicles, in terms of the AI technology that's available. So it might be an opportunity for our staff working on that to at least have a long-term view of this. Could also be used for our high frequency bus services as well as the standard stuff like, the rollout, like the bus lane or bus priority, whatever half lane you call it on Anzac Street, because it is only half lane, right? But I think that would be pleasantly surprised by how quickly that tech is moving.
Yeah, if it helps the storytelling and the narrative.
Innovative,
Yep.
yeah. There's
Happy to, like
opportunities
Phil
there,
says,
so we might.
we love talking about fancy
Phil.
buses.
Just while we're on this topic.
I think this is definitely a topic that the subcommittee could be talking about. I had written once to the team at HCC to ask whether we could bring them along to do a presentation on work that has been done, and that didn't go anywhere. So I'm happy to reinvigorate that, because I think there is value in the committee knowing the great work that Hamilton are doing, but also how that could be applied elsewhere. The other thought, Sarah, on your question is, there have been previous studies done on bus lane infrastructure, and the Hamilton to Cambridge study is one that's there, that went through this committee 3 or 4 years ago. As part of that, if you wanted it to come back to the committee, would you want us to summarise what some of those previous studies have been? Because the next item on the agenda around BRT funding and financing is also kind of in the same vein. It's what is the plan going to be is where it all ends up, isn't it? So that maybe is the natural next step for the BRT paper, as well as the conversation here is, where are we at? What do we need to do? Is that what you're asking?
Can you press your?
Thing was just thinking, how do we respond to, the questions around using the signals and giving buses green light priority where we can, and whether that's kind of a low hanging fruit, I guess, for us. And so being able to understand where the opportunities lie in that was kind of, I guess, my initial question, but I mean, I'll take direction in terms of furthering that conversation.
Things like that. Almost like a core of thinking. So when we come up with like our One Network framework, recent work that prioritised Anglesey Street PT, that means that we have to do certain things with our road space and the way that we prioritise PT infrastructure. So it's almost implicit to the ongoing work we're doing to prioritise certain routes, whether it's Clyde Street or Anglesey Street or Heathy Terrace. So that sort of embracing technology, utilising the existing transponders and other IT software is almost part of that corridor development. So if we need more focus on what that actually means, then great. I think that is useful things to know. But I think it's almost implicit in the work we're doing. It's a part of prioritising a corridor for PT. We'll be embracing every element of the toolbox we can use, and that's part of it, I think.
We, then are looking at whatever projects, prioritising our local share and looking at projects that are happening, that elected members, are then in a position where we're informed enough to go, oh, is this an opportunity if it, hasn't been included? So, yeah.
So I was just having a discussion with Phil in terms of, for our next meeting in February, it'll be a topic on the agenda, picking up on the discussion that we've just had. Now, got Mayor Adrian, then Angela.
Thanks. Yeah. Pamela really raised a really good question around testing the assumptions. I guess it's the other thing sits with us as councils as well when we're deciding whether we're low growth or medium growth, because usually we sit very conservatively, and the risk is that, oh, you look back, the growth was more. So I guess it's all part of that whole concept of what does growth look like, and understanding those triggers. So it's not just, we sort of caught in it as well. You're trying to plan for something, and if we haven't captured that we're growing faster, then there's a risk there, because it sort of goes side by side, doesn't it? Something for us to ponder as elected members to make sure that we acknowledge the growth, because I think it's come quite quickly. If we look back, it's come quite quickly. As when I think of Waipa with Cambridge, it's come very quickly, and for Waikato with Pocono. So we could reflect on that, but I think a lot of us have learnt from it. And yeah, will be very interesting to see where those numbers land in 30 years' time.
Angela, yes.
Yeah,
And then
thank
Sarah.
you. Yeah, just sort of closing off my thoughts around the bus priority. Yeah, I guess my question was, we talk about bringing people along the journey with us. In my mind, giving the bus the green light or keeping it green is a way. It's not taking away anyone's car park or anything. It's almost, hey, the bus is faster than my car. It's setting up for success, leading into more steps along the way towards bus hard infrastructure, I suppose. So that's sort of where my thinking was going. So yeah, appreciate that it is in that medium to long term thinking perhaps, but just wondering, especially for our fast and frequent buses, if it could be accelerated, that part. But yeah, happy for it to come back to the February meeting as well. So thank you.
Sarah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. There was one thing I forgot to ask about. Where does on page 47, there's that infographic. I'm just a little bit confused about it's got 9 frequent routes and 15 frequent routes. What's the timing in, say, between now and 2030? What was the expected rolled out? The actual timing of these? Well, this is why we put it over the 4 NLTP periods. There's not a specific point in time where we expect certain things to just all go, but the precedence to having those 9 frequent routes is what it's shown in that infographic, some investment in infrastructure and further planning so that they could start from 2030. Right, I see. So that they would start from then, but you're doing all the planning and the okay, that makes, and the storytelling and okay, thank you. And just the other part of that was in terms of emissions, because we talked about population and congestion, but what consideration has been given in terms of the emissions objective was in the original problem statements, which is why we're doing the whole thing, really. So in terms of emissions, it's built into the mode share goals. The best way to reduce emissions as a region in terms of transport is to have as many people travelling by sustainable ways as possible. So that was kind of higher up. The options themselves, I don't think they were directly compared for emissions, and they were very similar actually in all of the outcomes. So I don't think it would have made that much difference. And in any case, I think we're probably assuming 0 emission buses by that time. So there's an emission story and a climate story up front, but further that informed the whole thing.
It's actually a really good question because it just shows us sometimes we need to dip back a couple of years and think about why we did this in the first place. So the the problem statements that Bridget's referring to, if we go back a couple of years, even though it's not maybe a central government flavour of the month mail, we were very heavy on things like equity, emissions reduction, increasing patronage. So this to me is entirely consistent with those objectives, which is why we're doing it in the first place. So yeah, so behind the scenes, I think we're being very consistent with things like emissions as a objective for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If there's no further questions, I just, in terms of Andy Baker's earlier comment about the AT report, that's online, and Brooke will send out the link to that to all members. If you been keen to have a look at that. So we have a recommendation before us to receive the report. No further discussion. If I can have a mover and seconder for the receipt of that report, Angela S., Chair Pamela. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. And thanks very much, and thanks very much, Bridget, for your presentation, along with Phil. Phil, just in terms of time frame, because we've got the freight strategy next, I'm just wondering, we might take a short break for morning tea, then come back to freight, depending on the timing. We might hear in terms of the BRT funding, because we've got KPMG coming in on that, and then pick up on the freight strategy work. So, yes, yeah. Yep, okay. So we will take a, it's 10:55, we'll reconvene at 11:10, and we will then we'll go to item 7.6, the BRT funding and financing work, where KPMG will be beaming in, and then we'll go back to the freight strategy. We'll adjourn until 11:10. Thank you.